So, tell me about your practice.
I was actually just sitting. Um, so I would say it's going pretty well. I'm practicing according to the Mind Illuminated, working my way through the stages. So the thing we talked about a couple of weeks ago about um, cultivating joy in the practice and appreciating the fact that I'm waking up to mind wandering is still going strong. I would say it's even getting stronger. So
What's getting stronger?
the feeling of joy, contentment, gladness in the mind, even when there's unhelpful stuff happening. So even if there's a lot of distraction, I can still manage pretty well to not get frustrated, not beat myself up, not criticize myself, all those things I'm prone to do. So I'm still focusing a lot on the joy while trying to strengthen concentration, I guess. So it's actually going pretty well. I'm sitting quite a bit, quite for a long time, at least for my standards. I'm trying to get up to 45-minute sessions. I'm currently doing like a bit less than that. And I'm sitting twice a day, almost every day. So more often than not, I'm sitting twice a day.
Okay. And there's several questions that I would like to ask upon that. How did you choose to start sitting that way? Did you read that in a book?
What way specifically?
Well, twice a day for approaching 45 minutes.
Yeah, Chuladasa actually says that it's helpful to get to longer sessions as quickly as possible without like burning out. So to gradually extend sitting time up to at least 45 minutes. So I started with very short times, like maybe 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes in the beginning, and then increased gradually, like every week. So yesterday I actually sat for like close to an hour almost, and it was actually really nice. So it's getting easier to sit for longer times.
All right. Well, just as you would expect by going to a gym and with a trainer training in the beginning, you cannot do many reps with any heavy weights, but over time, you can do more and more reps. All right. There is a value in this. There is a real value in it, but this is not, how to say it, there is more to be done than merely sitting. The first question then that I would ask is this quality of feeling successful at being able to keep the mind free from hindrances. And the hindrances then are going to be the past and the future. I think, in fact, we've talked at great length about the hindrances, haven't we? Okay. Um, by knowing the hindrances, um, what we begin to do is make resolve that we're no longer going to entertain that hindrance and that we're not going to entertain it while we're sitting naturally, but we're going to not entertain those things during the day. That in fact, one of the mistakes that people make, and I've seen guys do this in Burma, they make the mistake that thinks that all of the practice of the Buddha has to do with sitting and sitting meditation, and therefore the more correctly one practices Buddhism, the more and more they stay seated in a particular posture. Okay, and that can go to the point that you go to places like the Mahasi Center in Rangoon, and you'll find a half a dozen or more monks that are there all the time, the same group. Some of them will even sleep in the hall, or let us say fall over in the middle of the night. But this is not the practice of the Buddha, nor did he live like that, but he did continue to sit. He did continue to enjoy it, but he did so because it was a pleasant abiding. And they use that term, it's a pleasant abiding. But there is also some work to be done. One needs to put in the right effort. And so if you're sitting as long as you are now and gaining some benefit from it, then basically what we call this is making the mind fit for work. Now, that's a term that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uses. Making the mind fit for work means that we can now put the mind to work on things that are worth putting the mind to, because you're already gaining skill at keeping the mind off of the things that are unworthy of attention. All right? And so we can see just by the bare practice that the hindrances are mostly to do with the past. But also philosophically, the Buddha talks about things dealing in the past as unappropriate attention. And we can think of it, in fact, the Brahmins had a way of looking at it in particular, and so the Buddha picked up that particular phraseology of what was I in the past? How was I in the past? With that happened, what happened? What will I be in the future, etc., like that. But these are merely conventional ways of asking the question that you can find also in song, like Que sera sera. You know, when I was a little girl, I asked my mom, what would I be? All right, so she's worried about the future as a little kid already. You know where she picked up that bad habit? From her mom. The one who sang her the song is one who can't live it. So we understand it from that level, but now we're understanding it more from a philosophical level, or from, let us say, a higher right view, is to recognize that when thoughts are there that are inappropriate, that by paying attention to things that are not appropriate, unwholesome states will arise. But when we're paying attention to those things that are wholesome, then wholesome states will arise. And so thinking about the past or thinking about the future, or even worried about a situation that's happening in the now. In fact, when you're sitting in meditation, worrying about what's happening now is not happening now. Right now is not happening until you're thinking about it, and then it becomes worrying about the now. But if we can take one thing from the teaching of the Buddha, and that is that state that you are in when you're sitting, that it has the joy, and it has the reality of breathing and watching the breath and becoming more and more alert and aware to the things right around you. And in fact, one of the ways of doing it is by starting to take fewer and fewer objects, recognizing that when the mind, just like the mind wanders away into hindrances, it will also wander away into current objects. And so one of the ways to do that is that as soon as you recognize that you fixed upon an object, then you can move it slightly. And now some people think that with mindfulness of breathing that you got to fix the mind in one point. Some people will teach to have the nose tip. Others will talk about the back of the throat. Others will talk about, in fact, following or chasing the breath in the sense of going in, and so your awareness comes from the front of the face down into the chest, and then from the chest back out. Another way of doing it is starting to focus upon what's happening in the chest area, knowing that what we're really looking for is the effects of the blood chemistry when the mind is not in wholesome states or when it drips. So that, for instance, people who have anxiety will be better off by watching their chest area to make sure that any time that there's some tightness in the chest, that's the beginning of anxiety, so that they can breathe through it, get it out, etc., like that. So in general, what we're saying is that there's no need to take a particular fixed object, but rather you can keep the mind moving, and that if you can get it to the point to where it's not clinging to any object at all, then in this regard, seeing becomes merely seeing, hearing becomes merely hearing. So the seeing that you're seeing is just seeing, and you're just seeing everything. And it comes in kind of as a flood. There's just so much happening. I mean, even on your screen behind you, there is just so much happening behind your body with that set of curtains and all the details and everything that are there. And by not fixing on any particular thing, we can begin to understand that a lot of stuff is going on right now. And so we allow seeing to be merely seeing and hearing to be merely hearing without taking an object. And this could, when it's successful, be considered or called a vipassana jhana, as opposed to the kind of jhanas that those guys get into when they're sitting in the meditation hall and going deeper and deeper in that regard. Because in fact, in the fourth jhana, one learns not to take an object. You probably read books on it about talking about expanding consciousness, expanding space, and the one called perception and neither perception or non-perception. That's the state of where we're just not taking any objects. We're leaving consciousness as merely a consciousness, but it feels expanded. Or even Bhikkhu Bodhi, by the way, made a very, very wrong translation when he calls it infinite. The concept of infinite did not exist in the time of the Buddha. Now, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a computer scientist and all of that kind of stuff, and I know that Bhikkhu Bodhi does not have a scientific understanding when he uses the word infinite. So a better word would be boundless or not fixedness. In other words, we're not bound to a particular object. We become unbound to that object and all of the other objects. Okay, and so unbinding or boundless is mistaken for infinity. Now, you probably heard the term sotapan, and it is sometimes you've heard it translated as stream enterer. Believe me, when you enter like a leaf entering into a fast going brook, it's not a stream anymore, it's a flood. It's a tsunami. It's a big blast.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's happening all the time. All you need to do is just stop holding objects and start letting no object come flooding in.
Easier said than done.
Their consciousness becomes boundless.
Easier said than done.
But now that I've said it, you can start to play with it. Don't make this as a goal. Make this as a toy to play with.
So in what way would one play with it? Just try to...
As soon as you recognize that you've taken an object, get your mind off of that object. First, experiment with the body. Start paying attention to the body, but not any particular place on the body. So if you start to feel an itch, move your mind away from the itch, because you've already noted that. Don't dwell on it. Start moving. So you begin to unbind the mind from the objects that you normally bind to. Even Tanisaro has a book that he knows exactly what we're talking about here when he writes the title of that book is Mind Like Fire Unbound. It's not the fire that's unbound, it's the mind that becomes unbound to any objects.
So, how does this relate to the first point you made of making the mind fit for work? Is that related?
Is in fact the same thing. In fact, you're making it even more fit for work because basically what the mind is fit for work on is the Four Noble Truths. This is suffering. This is the cause of suffering. All right. Now, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, we speak of them as if they were an intellectual exercise, something written in a book. But another way of understanding the Four Noble Truths is in the sense of this unbound reality so that we can begin to see things in the sense of suffering and no suffering. That this is the real way of looking at it, of seeing what is suffering and what is not suffering. By unbinding, we can also begin to experience more of the very subtle things that come by because we're not distracted by some object that we're clinging to. And so our awareness becomes expanded. You become much more alert. An example of that is being able to drive an automobile. If you're thinking about the work that you're doing, you might have a brilliant idea while you're driving, and a second later, a car crash. But if you're really not focused on any object, whether that you're just simply focused on the situation, this is driving. And so though you see someone come out from one side of the street, you don't focus on them because your job is to make sure that you're driving safely. That's the only intention. All right, so now you can do that throughout your whole life in the sense of being on guard without taking a particular object. Here's a clear example of that. Let us say that someone was on guard duty during the war, whatever war, could be World War II, and he's on guard duty, but he's got a magazine with him, and he pulls out that magazine, and he starts looking at that magazine, and he's going to miss out when the lieutenant comes. And believe me, the lieutenant is more dangerous than the enemy. But either one of them is going to be suffering. You got to be ready for the suffering when it comes. So in this regard of taking fewer and fewer objects or not being concerned with any particular thing allows us to be more and more and more in the here now, more and more and more into that flood, to stay with what's going on right now. A little phrase I've heard is, be alert. The world needs more alerts.
I don't get it, sorry.
Alert means to be awake, to
Yeah.
be here now, to be not focused on anything so that you're ready for anything. The word alert is the same thing as a nerd or whatever. Like.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So this sounds a lot like a practice that works well off the cushion in terms of just in daily life.
It's intended for off the cushion. That in fact the sitting meditation on the cushion is to get you ready to be able to do this off the cushion. Hence we start using things like becoming more aware of the body while we're off the cushion. Start watching what the body is doing. Grasping and clinging objects, that instead of just doing things on automatic pilot the way we've learned to do in the past 30 or 40 years, we open, we stretch, we grasp, we touch, we note, we grasp, we withdraw, etc., like that. In fact, there's several different ways of talking about it, and I just did that, okay? Notice how I'm moving my hand very consciously. In fact, one of the little jokes is about Nosferatu or Dracula, that they close in on the close up while the sleeping person is there, and then you'll see this creepy hand come up like that. That's the way that we want to start thinking about. Okay, the Dracula grasp. We start opening our hand to pick up things. When you touch it, you note it well, where it starts to touch. You begin to notice what your hands are doing. In fact, you've heard stories like the eyes are the window to the soul. Well, guess what? Your hands are the back door. And if you look at the way that the human body is built, just neurophysiology, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. That the hands through the body wind up right into the spinal cord and come right into the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain controls the hands. Sorry, the human part of your mind does not control the hands. The reptilian brain controls the hands. The frontal cortex has to do that indirectly. And so we're beginning actually to establish and rewire an appropriate connection between the frontal cortex and the anterior cortex by doing this technique of slowing down the hand movements. Begin to watch them. And when I mean watch, I'm talking about sensationally watch. Watch as if the hands themselves were the eyes, because they are the neurons. So you begin to, while you're grasping and reaching, you begin to experience and feel the hand. Okay, so we're going to expand awareness by expanding these things into particular directions. We start watching what the hands are doing. We start watching what the face is doing. We become conscious of the body movements.
So is there any, so obviously this is a huge field of possibilities, because basically you, everything you're doing you could be aware of in that sense. So I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Right, don't be, because this is a game to be played, not a challenge. Let's put it this way. So far, so good. You've already made it this far with all the mistakes that you've been making. Intend to make a few more. That's okay.
So it's more of a playful attitude of how often can I bring this awareness
yes,
to bear?
Make it a joy. It's a game to be played, as well as a skill to be developed. But now we want to make it more. You see, you've already been doing a lot of the work that would be considered practice, to keep bringing the mind back and bringing the mind back and bringing the mind back so we're going to continue to do that, but we're going to be using the body. In fact, we're going to be using all of the satipatthana to be able to bring the satipatthana into the world and live our lives, because your only other option is to sit there and squat on the floor in the Mahasi Sayadaw meditation hall for the rest of your existence. All right? Or the other third option is just keep futzing along with unhappiness.
So it's a way of bringing the meditation into daily life, basically.
Yes, except it's backwards. You've got a cause and effect relationship backwards there. You're not bringing your sitting practice into daily life. What you're doing is that you're using your sitting practice as seclusion to start practicing the things that you need to do with your mind, so that you can then practice them when you're off the cushion. Different perspective. In other words, the cushion has intrinsically no value. No more than If your intention is to get on the airplane, then parking your car is just one of those little things. But it's not getting on the airplane. Parking cars is not getting on the airplane. Getting on the airplane is getting on the airplane. But it's something you're likely to do. All right. And so that's the way of looking at it. It's a preliminary step. And that I use it in the following way. Within psychology, they have the 3 P's, which is permission, potency, and protection, in the sense that the client needs to have permission to change. He needs the protection of the client, and he eventually needs to have some potency in his change so that it actually has some power to it. All right. But another way of looking at it is, with Buddhism, we use practice, performance, and play in the sense of a musician. Okay, the beginning musician has to practice, and it may not be all of that beneficial, but if this child can practice music that he likes to play and is successful at it, he will be better at it than if he chooses music that's too hard. All right, and so eventually, though, the student has to practice in public, and that public practice is actually a performance, a recital, where he has to actually be on stage, even if he's not only the only actor, he's the entire audience. He's still on stage because he's out there practicing the Dhamma, but the only difference is that now he's not secluded. We use the seclusion to get away from it all. In fact, the Buddha has an example of that in the sutta. I think it's in 36, where he talks about, he even says that this is one of the few examples that he's had that he knows is genuinely his, that he thought this one up, where the Four Noble Truths he borrowed from Ayurvedic medicine. Suffering and no suffering, he thought that up. But the Four Noble Truths, he borrowed that. All right. And one of the original that he had was the idea of a log and a bog. Okay, so you've got a log that's fallen over in the swamp, and now a man of the Buddha's time, and they had people who were actually professional fire makers. So you hire a professional fire maker. Can that fire maker set that log on fire? Probably not. It's soaking wet. And so what if he takes that log and he puts it out on the beach? Can he light it on fire now? No, because it's still sopping wet. But what if he lets it dry out? Gives it some time, gives it in seclusion, have that log secluded from that swamp, then it will dry out enough so that it can be set on fire. So that's the whole quality of the sitting meditation, is to put that log on the beach as often as you can, to start draining out all of those hindrances, to get the mind free from hindrance. That's what the whole quality of the sitting meditation is. So that we can now get the mind fit for work.
Okay, so I still have a question.
Yes.
It sounds to me like you're describing 2 distinct practices. So the first thing you talked about was whenever the mind takes an object, to basically disengage from that object. And the second thing I heard you talk about was basically what I would rephrase as just mindfulness of the body in daily life. So while I'm grasping something, be aware of the hand, feel the actual touch of the hand to the object. So I don't, like, are those the same thing, or because it doesn't sound like
they are deeply related, but one is more advanced than the other. All right, the one of not taking any object at all is a later kind of practice, but that you can start to play with that while you're beginning to watch your hands, because you'll begin to note that while you're watching your hands, a whole lot of stuff is happening. For instance, in the past 5 seconds, you pointed your finger, you put it to your nose, you've run it across like that, you've dropped it down, and then you nodded your head. Are you aware of all of those things?
Somewhat.
After I describe it, yes. Okay. So that's a way of beginning to understand is what's the body doing? But normally by taking objects, because that's what the mind does. Normally the objects that we take is a mental object. Hence we're back into hindrances. So one of the qualities of being here now is by not taking any mental objects and just allow whatever objects that are presenting themselves to you, you let them present themselves, but you don't cling to them. An example, or let us say, in the Mahasi method, they have a phrase of note it well and let it pass. Let it pass. Don't cling to it. Don't grasp it as an object. So you begin to watch things as a process rather than event. Grasping things as an object is an event, but the object itself is a process. Everything's in process. Through the laws of entropy and through the laws of gravity and through the laws of electromagnetism, etc., like that. I won't go into strong nuclear force right now. So, but they're subject to basic laws. Everything is then operated by these basic laws on a regular, constant basis. How constant? At the speed of light. So because everything is temporary, everything is gauging, if we take an object, we're automatically, by grasping that object mentally, we're beginning to go back into the past. We've frozen ourselves into time. That might be necessary. An example of that is by watching a bird. Because we got a lot of birds here to watch. I've seen some spectacular birds. One of them that was very interesting, in fact, I had to watch a little while because he was so green and mixed so well with the flora that I had to wait for him to move before I could catch his outline. Almost as if it were what's the name of that movie? Predator or Alien or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's Alien.
Alien. So, that's still in the moment. Once we've taken that object and seen that bird, now the bird is no longer interesting and we move on and just be here with the moment. With the wind. The wind is constantly blowing. This is a really marvelous place to just be here now. It's just such a nice place, but you can have that nice feeling about any place that you are by not taking a particular object. But whenever you're moving your body, you do need to take that object of the body as the object and watch it in process. But after you've grasped the object, and in fact, one of the most important things is setting objects that you already have in the hand down. Because if you do this correctly, you will not go absent-minded longer than 10 seconds. You will not lose your car keys and have to tear the house upside down looking for the keys because you're watching what you're doing. And so by watching the hands, etc., like that, so that's actually a performance stage. But we want to be able to play with it because we want to get beyond performance, to really play with our life, to make your life a leela, a dance. Have you heard that word, leela?
Not in that context, I think.
Well, what context have you heard it?
I know that it's a female first name.
Oh, okay. Actually, it's a female goddess in Hindu, but it actually is the dance of the universe. That everything is dancing. Let us say everything except human beings. Human beings no longer dance, now they're marching. And we need to join the dance, to be here now, to be with it. And by doing that and by joining the dance, You become not only a part of the dance, but you become aware of the dance in its magnitude. That it's not a stream of one little thing after another, because that's the way we've been seeing it, as a stream, because I grasp this, I grasp that, I grasp that. But when I stop grasping and I recognize, wow, look what it's all about. There's so much going on, and that we feel really marvelous that we can experience that, to be with the flow, to be in it, to be part of the dance. And these are all techniques that we're using to grow to that experience, because that experience is also can be known or thought of as first jhana. And that the Buddha says, in fact, there's a story about it, I think it's also in 36, where he talks, when he's actually dragging himself out of the creek that he fell into, with the thought, if I can't pull myself out of a creek, how can I become enlightened in the condition that I'm in? And so he started taking solid food. His friends saw him eating and getting fat, and they left him and went to the Deer Park, leaving him to figure out what's really going on. Well, really, the underlying foundation is that the Buddha had already been to a lot of different teachers and gained skills, the skills that he needed to focus the mind. But he also realized that first jhana, just being first jhana, was nice, but then normally what people would do is go to the second and the third and the fourth jhana, etc., like that, and then they would come out and now they wouldn't be in jhana at all. What the Buddha is really talking about here is that because he remembered the experience and remembered he'd already done all of this other stuff lately, but then he remembered the rose apple tree. You probably heard the story that he was sitting under the rose apple tree watching a plowing ceremony that his father was doing, and he entered upon and he was in the first jhana. Now, he could have not done that first jhana, and probably unless he's already trained for it, and we actually kind of have a really good idea who the teacher was. It was the guy who was also there when the Buddha gave his first Dhammachakra Sutta, Dhammachakra Sutta. So the very guy that taught him first jhana was the guy who was the first one to become enlightened under the Buddha, which was an old Brahmin. He was also the one who predicted that the Buddha would not become a world-turning monarch, that he would in fact become a Buddha. So he already had a really, really excellent teacher from childhood who taught him the Rig Vedas and all of the other stuff. We know that the Buddha was highly skilled in that stuff because he could win every argument that the Brahmins could come up with. So that quality of the first jhana that he experienced as a young man under the rose apple tree, he says, why am I afraid of the pleasure, the rapture and pleasure born of the experience of this first jhana? Because he had been practicing under Naganagaputta doing the flagellation. That's why they even have the idea of the starving Buddha or the breathingless meditation. The breathingless meditation is when you stop up all the orifices of the body and don't let yourself breathe until you pass out. And the Buddha did that, and he busted his eardrums. And he tells about it with the rushing of the wind and all of that kind of stuff. And so he decided not going to practice those kind of things. But what did he need to come to was the understanding of suffering and no suffering. But this idea of getting into seclusion was what he knew needed to be done, so that you can get into the mind and get the mind cleaned out so that you can see things the way that they need to be seen. And that's what the Buddha was able to do in that 6-week period of time. He spent it with the Four Noble Truths. Possibly more likely, most of the time was understanding Paticca Samuppada, which means understanding exactly how the mind works that leads us into suffering. And that's what he was able to figure out, and he had to figure that out in the first jhana rather than hanging out in fourth jhana, which is so deeply out of it that you cannot make those kind of connections. So he sat there in the first jhana, and he put this system together, and he came to understand that that's what it's all about. Suffering and no suffering, and walking around in a state of no suffering can be accomplished. But when you're walking around in a state of no suffering, it's almost by textbook definition that first jhana, which means number one, free from the hindrances, and number two, or actually not free, they use the word secluded intentionally. Secluded from the hindrances and the joy that arises from being free from those hindrances. And you can get a body rush from that. This is what piti is all about, is that you can experience the body in a new way. You can feel the energy flows. You can feel what's going on in the body. And we can get into this state of first jhana and be satisfied with life, be fully aware. And we don't need anything else. That's enough. So you probably heard teachers say that, oh, you're already enlightened, you just don't know it. Well, sometimes you are enlightened and sometimes you're not, which means sometimes you're in first jhana and sometimes you're not. When you're in first jhana, you're free from suffering. And the mind is fit for work. What is the mind fit for work? To pay attention to what's going on right here, right now, in relationship to the entire teaching of the Four Noble Truths. This is suffering. This is what causes suffering. This is the end of suffering. And this is the path to the end of suffering. Now, that path to the end of suffering, while it's got 8 points, I'll tell you about that later, but in order to practice what you've been doing, you are already using the primary 4. The first one is right mindfulness. When sati arises, you know, for instance, that the mind has wandered away from the breath. That's sati arising. Eventually it becomes satipanya, to remember to be wise. Or another way of saying it is sati tatata, remember to be here. So sati is the first one. And that with sati, we have to arouse effort. And that effort is to come out of wrong view into right view. And then the next one is right action, right effort in order to have the right attitude. So we have with right view when we can see, for instance, I can see that my intention was to watch the breath. I'm not watching the breath. Right attitude is to come back and start watching the breath. One's right effort then is to do what we know is right to do. And a lot of the practice then is going to be to understand and to define more and more clearly what is right view and what is wrong view. And we do that through the investigation of what is suffering and what is not suffering. And it's got some layers to it. In fact, it's worthy of an entire set of talks, right view alone. And we'll get into that later. But for right now, you can understand that there are, in fact, 2 kinds of right view. Wrong view is wrong view because it always is caused suffering. Right view is of 2 kinds. One is ordinary right view, which is the right view of the society. It keeps society operating and running and functioning normally, but it still is subject to suffering. Supramundane right view has no suffering. It has no suffering because it's got no selfishness in it. It's not selfish. When you have self, when there's selfishness, dukkha will come. But supramundane right view does not ripen in clinging. It does not ripen in selfishness. Okay, an example is that the wealthy guy in town contributes a lot of money to the building of the temple. And everybody agrees that he's doing the right thing. And everybody benefits by him building and helping with the temple. But if he thinks that by building that temple he's going to have a wonderful existence later, then that's ordinary right view, bound in clinging, ripens in attachment. But if you can say, no, I'm going to enjoy building this building right now and enjoy the friendships that I'm having by building this building, and when the building is finished, we can enjoy the building as a building, and we don't have to worry about what the future brings, then that's more right, supramundane right view. All right? So, once one understands what is right view, then we can always, with right effort, take on the right intention to live our lives in right view, supramundane right view, which is to the bringing to the end of suffering. And so this is why we began to bring up this idea of not taking any object as meditation, because that helps us be in the here now. It also helps us become watchful, on guard for the things that can harm us. And we can go into a lot of detail on that at a later time, but for an example of this is, you probably heard of have you heard the word metta?
Yes.
Okay. And in relationship to metta, there's 4 of them called the Brahma Viharas. And that the third one is called mudita, which is translated as sympathetic joy. All right. Let's look at the word sympathy for a moment and recognize that it's not joy. Normally, for ordinary Buddhist children and whatnot, they're taught sympathetic joy means is that even though I didn't get the job that I wanted, I should congratulate the guy who did get the job and kind of go secondhand on his joy. Have you ever heard it expressed that way?
No.
Okay, that's ordinary right view. The right view, supramundane right view, is to recognize that all emotions, all human emotions, are sympathetically vibrated, sympathetically sent. So if someone is angry, he wants other people to be angry. If someone is in grief, they want everybody to be in grief. That's what a funeral is all about, sharing grief. Okay, so we see that anger and grief and all kinds of things. Guess what? In the United States, the number 1 vibration is greed. And the second number 1 vibration is fear. Fear based in ignorance. Okay, so the guys who have the most greed, the super wealthy, are vibrating the stupid in fear to all get them to vote for Trump so that the wealthy can get more wealth and the poor people can get more hate, more fear. And that's the way that it works in the U.S. But it works like that everywhere. That's just society. All right. However, we can, in fact, sympathy vibrate in joy if we are sharp enough to get out of the way of the slings and arrows of outrageous rage and outrageous unhappiness and outrageous suffering that comes our way, that is hurled directly at us from other people. And if you're on guard, you can watch it coming, you can step out of the way, you can take a couple of deep breaths, manufacture some joy, and hurl that right back at them. So, because if you can send joy back, the joy actually vibrates at a higher vibration and eventually will take over the anger. It actually will do that good for grief too. An example of that is that if someone is in heavy grief and you know the person who died that they're grieving over, remember something joyful and happy about that person and share that with them. Rather than, oh, I'm so sorry that you lost your friend and on and on. Don't go into that. Oh, I remember he used to do this. He used to be able to dance in such a two-step like that, and get them out of it, even momentarily getting them out of their grief. So this is what we mean by that sympathetic joy. The sympathy is that you are in control when you are in control. And when you are not in control, you are subject to the vagaries of anything that can happen coming to you from society. And the way that we begin to learn how to do it correctly is by getting out of society and getting into a secluded place so that we can begin to see these slings and arrows of outrageous, stupid thoughts that we have and begin to get out of their way.
I have a question coming up.
Yes.
So, in terms of, you were talking about, basically what we've been talking about for the whole time is getting, what was the formulation you used, get the mind fit for work.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that's needed there is the intention to actually do the work. And sometimes, if not even often, I find myself having a different intention of maybe trying to ignore things, trying... What's funny about that?
What's funny about it is that you're singing everybody's song. Everybody does that, and this is also the primary failure that people don't meditate. And that is, at that point, you don't have, how to say it? The joy is what you'll need to do to build up that right intention that it takes to actually practice it all.
Yeah,
because so what's happening is that I'm destroying your greed intentionally. What greed? The greed to meditate. What are you going to get out of meditation? You ain't going to get nothing out of meditation. You ain't going to get nothing out of it. Don't try to get anything out of it. Instead, see it as piano practice. Whoa, wait a minute. I don't want to practice piano. Yes, I know. I know exactly how kids are. I've been there, done that. We don't want to do it because it's easier and not nearly as painful to just let the mind spin on. And so long as I have meditation teachers who tell me you put in this many hours and it will give you this benefit, you'll let their promise of a reward be your reward instead of getting a real reward out of it. And this is where most people are caught. That's one of the biggest problems with getting Dhamma out of a book, is because the book can't slap you up the side of the head and say, look at what you're doing. Yes, you're exactly right. This is one of the major reasons why people who do a Goenka retreat wait sometimes years before they do another Goenka retreat. They've got to get back into enough suffering to overdo or overturn the amount of suffering that they had when they were in that first retreat. Why were they in such suffering in that first retreat? Because they weren't practicing correctly. Why weren't they practicing correctly? Because they expected some benefit out of the retreat, instead of it being a practice session that requires the intention. And so often in that regard, this is why Paticca is sometimes taught in 24 steps, with dukkha becoming the foundation of ignorance on the path back, in the sense that it's only your suffering that you were already being able to see before you ever started meditating. You were already dissatisfied with your life. Why would anybody pick up a skill that is so robust and requires so much time, and not just time and effort, but right effort? In the sense that any wrong effort that you put in there is just extra effort that you're putting in there that is not getting you any benefit at all. So with both time and right effort, why would you do that? The answer is because you can already see the suffering. But now we're going on high alert. Now we're at battle stations. Now the alarm is going off. Ooga, 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 ooga. Battle stations, incoming. Okay? And you say, well, wait a minute, I want to take a nap. Things were pretty good before like they were. The answer is, oh, well, all right, if you're willing to take battle damage like you've always been taking battle damage, then sleep right on, my child. But if you want to bring all of this crap to an end, you've got to be up for the battle. You got to be on battle stations. You got to be on guard. I'm going to use that. I have not ever thought about that before, battle stations. I like that. I was in the Navy, by the way. I know what battle stations were.
So a lot of times the way this is taught by other teachers, I've heard, for example, by Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this a lot as well, and it's often spoken about in the way that being here now is intrinsically rewarding in the sense that it's really nice. But the picture you're painting, and something that I can resonate with as well, is that it's actually really painful sometimes.
No, it's the change of attitude that's painful. Okay. Let us say that the battle, using that analogy, imagine that you're asleep in your rack. You just went to bed, and that Auga horn goes off. Battle stations, battle stations. The first thought is, oh no, I don't want to do this. But you recognize something inside saying, no, you got to get up, you got to go. And so you do. Well, all of this is done mentally. That guy in the rack, he's got to have court-martial as a motivation to get him out of the rack and go up top side to man his battle station. For the human, it's such a small effort. All you have to do is just change your mind's attitude out of the wrong attitude that you were in by having that battle station horn go off. That battle station horn is mindfulness. The mindfulness bell just rang. What are you going to do? Are you going to sleep on, or are you going to use that bell to wake up with right effort in order to see that what you were doing was not appropriate, and you're going to do the appropriate now because you're changing? So you see these three things, or these four things, run in circle around each other: right mindfulness, right attitude, right mindfulness, right effort, right view, and right attitude. Now, the Buddha says, in fact, that right view comes first. Of these things, right view comes first. And then with right view, as, let us say, an overall or overarching right view, comes a kind of an overarching right attitude, so that in the moment, sati comes. And then that right, and with sati, we can say, okay, let's look at the attitude. Let's look at, in fact, a right view. Let's have the effort. Let's get the effort together to do this thing. We take that deep breath, and now we're at battle stations, and we can look. How marvelous is this? And I was sleeping my bunk, and now I can come and be here in this moment. Okay, so you can think of it like that. Yes, it is absolutely marvelous that, in fact, the marvelous quality of it is that once we can see that, we want to, let us say, bring to a halt those things that disturb that. Of going back into hindrances, or responding to someone else's anger, or even just laying our own anger out because of our own feelings of not liking. So we become on guard for suffering, in the sense that we're going to start watching feelings as well. In the beginning, we start watching body, because body is easy to see. Feelings, not so easy to see. We have to start paying attention to liking and not liking. And once we begin to pay attention to liking and not liking, we begin to see how liking leads to clinging, clinging leads to selfishness, selfishness leads to suffering. I'm paraphrasing in there. I throw selfishness in. It's a good one to throw in. It's better than. So the practice is in fact the same, but I talk about it with that battle stations and a Uga horn kind of thing, not because I'm expecting it to be really hard, but because I'm showing you that students make it that hard, when in fact it's actually just an easy thing to do of changing one's attitude. And we know that we can do that because the option is to stay stuck in suffering, where in fact just by going topside, taking our battle station, we can experience the beauty of the night. Just keeping that analogy going. But to be here now is so much better than worrying about something that happened last month. So does that clear up your question about when you were
Somewhat,
talking about
yeah.
Tit
I don't think
Nahan?
I don't think entirely, because one of the things I notice in myself is a resistance to doing what you describe, and I'm still somewhat wondering where that comes from. So that's probably still some wrong
Because
attitude
you're in
in
the
there.
habit of not doing it.
Yeah.
And so this is one's right effort. Recognize that it's going to take a little bit of an effort because there is some resistance in there. Now, when you overcome that little bit of resistance, you do so congratulating yourself. I can get beyond that. You keep doing that a little bit over and over and over again. Every time that you recognize that that resistance is there, you can say, come on, get up. You can dust yourself off. You don't have to lay on the ground. You can pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. That resistance is there. It's in every student. Sometimes it's in students who are well versed, have years of experience, are dedicated to the practice, and yet they'll have bad patches like that. But they can come back out of it. So the question is, can, with whatever you're reading and the help that I can give you, etc., like that, can you keep on course? Or are you going to pay attention to that part of you that just wants to die? Because I will say it like this: every person who begins to meditate and to gain some value and actually get started at it and then quits, this is the reason. So don't let it happen to you.
So
Recognize what I'm saying, that there is something in there.
yeah.
In fact, we'll talk about it at a later time when we start talking about it as one of the high fetters.
Yeah. It's I will definitely put more emphasis on that. I know that it's important and good to do, but I've been putting it off with a lot of thoughts. Oh, this is too hard. Like, I've already done some of this. It's like I've done enough, kind of those thoughts, and that's
I know, right. Exactly. Uh-huh.
like,
In other words,
let
I
me
have
just
put
go
in
back
my dues.
into.
I want the law of karma to come in here and save me now. I've paid my dues.
For me, it was more of a thought of um, I don't know if that's maybe laziness, or um, it's a thought of there is something like blissful ignorance, there is something like just dropping all responsibility, like going back to that really, I guess, loser's position of I'm just going to ignore everything. I'm going to pretend that I'm not responsible and just put my head in the sand just for half an hour, because that's in the moment it's easier than having that effort.
Okay, except that the ostrich who's buried his head in the sand has not made the danger go away, and the ostrich knows that, whether he's actually being eaten in this moment yet or not.
Yeah, it's very short-sighted.
Yes. So, what you're saying is that blissful ignorance, and I'm challenging on how blissful is this ignorance, when all it was in the first place was avoiding. And what were you avoiding? The little bit of effort it takes to feel good. Yeah. Sorry about that. That's exactly what we're talking about, right? You wouldn't take the little bit of effort that it takes to feel good, and so you're going to now lie to yourself and call it blissful when you know that that ignorance is in fact dangerous.
Yeah.
And I'm calling you out on it now happily, because I expect you to come to it happily. That's the way to approach this, because it's not too hard, and you know that it's not too hard because you've already gotten how many months of practice already, and that you know that you can clean the mind out. You know that you can do that. And by knowing that you can do it, you also know that you can do it again. And even if you recognize, oh, I've got that thought of it's too much work or it's hard right now, count to 5 or take a second, because that's just a thought that will pass away. And then you can do it. But if you give in to it, then it's likely that you'll go back into the state of ignorance, just as basically that point in time when you had mindfulness. You see, every student has that. Mindfulness enough alone is not enough. It takes right effort and right view in order to gain right attitude in that moment. Wrong attitude or wrong view is, this is too much work. One's right view is, I can do this, I can do this, I can be successful at this, can do. And so with that little bit of effort, I can do this. Or as Obama once said, yes, we can. We can do this. Now that
good.
Now that little thought, yes, we can, or I can do this, or Goenka has the phrase, never mind, start again. That never mind means throw that thought out. What are the thought? The thought of negativity, the thought of wrong view, that this is too hard. Never mind that thought. Start again. Eventually, it becomes yeehaw.
That phrase of "never mind, start again" has been stuck in my head ever since you first said it. I don't know. It's very powerful to me.
Good. So look at the never mind part, because that's what you're confronting right now. Is that thanatos, that death wish, that I want out of here kind of feeling.
Yes.
The fact, and in a way, it's like the little child who demands whatever it is that your child demands without having to do anything for it. To where here we're actually saying, well, I'm a victim because I didn't get it, even though I didn't do anything for it. Or I demand to get the value of the meditation without having to put in the right effort to get it. But when we change that attitude into, oh, I can be successful by doing something very easy to do. It really is an easy thing to do. I mean, whose mouth is it anyway who doesn't curl into a smile?
I think I have a lot of stuff to go on for putting that into practice.
Everyone does. You're not any bigger a victim than anybody else. Don't play that game with me.
No, I meant that in the sense that I really have a clear picture of what I need to work on, I think.
Good. But anything that you are going to work on, you can be successful at it in that moment. What we have to do again is change the attitude with right view, because ordinary right view is looking for the future result. Super mundane right view takes its value right here and now. Right here now. Okay, so when the mind wanders away, yeehaw, I caught you. I caught you wandering away, and now I can be here and just enjoy the moment, and I don't have to think about that right now. I do not have to think about how Aunt Susie gave me that spanking. I do not have to think about Grandma at the age of 3 when she got angry at us because we set the basement on fire.
I hope that's a fictional example.
No, these are all real things, but you can see what a smile they are now.
Good.
So give me an example of something that's happened bad to you in the past year or so.
In the last year? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I got yelled at work because I forgot to close a window when I was the last one in the office.
Enough. This is not about Windows, so you can forget Windows for the moment. All right? Your job from now on is any and every time you think about getting yelled at work, you're going to throw that thought out. You're not ever going to entertain thoughts of getting yelled at work. Anytime, okay? So this is the way of starting to begin that, all right? So instead of giving you my examples, we'll give you yours, all right? So now, from henceforth, not because I'm giving you this assignment, but because you decide that it's going to be this way, that any thoughts that come up about that episode and that window and that person and getting yelled at and the whole scene, anytime that comes up, you throw that out. And you throw it out with the smile of a champion. I'm not going to let that one worry me anymore. Out you go.
Okay.
And then something else will happen, or you'll remember something else, and you'll say, okay, that one, out, no more. Pretty soon you get to the point of nothing in the past is going to be encroaching on your mind. You're going to enjoy this present moment, and you're not going to think about anything that happened bad. Because more than likely, whoever it was who was present at that bad episode that happened to you, they've forgotten all about it already. Only you were clinging to it. When I realized that, I said, oh my goodness, I'm the only one who cares anymore. Look at how much suffering I'm causing myself. Nobody else cares. Everybody else has forgotten about it. So you begin to think of it like that.
Yeah, I see.
So anytime that thought about, in fact, while you're at home, Any time that any thoughts of work come up, throw those out too. You're not at work. Anytime that thoughts of windows comes up, closed or unclosed, and you don't have any windows around. Where's no windows? Out. Windows are out. Work is out. Getting yelled at. Out of the mind. Come and be here now instead. This is a much more pleasant moment. It really is. Believe me, you were not enjoying getting yelled at that particular point in time.
No.
And so anytime that you think about it, you'll remember how you felt about it.
Yeah.
Which means you feel bad every time you think about it. So don't think about it. That gives rise specifically to the idea of the elephant will always wander back to his place and will always get caught there. This is why that joke is in the you've heard the Buddhist joke of don't think about elephants. It's real. Don't think about that elephant. Keep it out of the mind. This is the mental training that we're going through. That's a hindrance now. Work is a hindrance in the mind. When you're at work, doing work, it's the present moment. But when you're on the way to work, you're not at work. You're driving. You should be thinking about driving. So we begin. Go ahead.
It's almost got a feeling that I know from some Zen schools. Maybe I don't know if school is the right word, but basically whatever you're doing in that moment, that's what you're doing. And if you're cleaning the floor, you're cleaning the floor 100%, and there's no thinking of what I need to do next. And when I'm doing the next thing, that's what I'm doing. So it's like it's hard. It's the opposite of multitasking.
Actually, if you do it well, it's zero tasking. Everything's a play. There are no tasks left.
Yeah. But is that a helpful at least approximation of it to kind of avoid like doing one thing while you're preoccupied with another? That's what I would classify as multitasking.
Yes. However, when multitasking is actually done as multitasking, it is almost always doing a bit of this task and doing a bit of that task and doing a bit of this task and doing a bit of that task. And for people who are capable of doing that, that means that they still have to pay attention to what they're doing. And women are very good at that, as opposed to men are not very good at it, because they may be doing this and then they're doing that, but they're thinking about the other. And so when they come back to do this, they screw it up. They're not very good at multitasking because they've always got one too many tasks to do. And that's thinking about something that they're not doing while they're trying to do something. So you're exactly right. That Zen is precisely coming from the Buddha. Doing what you're doing now is exactly the teaching of the Buddha. He even gave himself that name. I'm surprised that we even call it Buddha, because the Buddha never referred to himself as Buddha. He referred to himself as Tathata and Tathagata. Tathagata means he who, well, it depends upon how you use the word come and go. But it's normally translated as going to the now.
Okay. I've heard it translated as one gone thus.
Well, what is thus?
I don't know. Like in that way, I would imagine?
No, not in that way, in this way. Thus is this.
Okay.
Rather than that.
And what's the other one? The other name?
Thus gone one, or well, it actually has oh, you mean the word Tathagata?
Yeah, that's the one I translated, right? And what's the other one?
Oh, Tatata?
Yeah.
Tatata is thusness. It is thisness. It is this present moment. It is right now. And so the Tathagata is one who goes to the here now. Bit of a translation problem. Possibly a more correct would be one who is here now. Or this one, or this one. This is it. As you can see, languages, neither Pali nor English, either one of them are suitable for Dhamma. Whoever the people were who were inventing languages were far too busy inventing languages and not nearly enough paying attention to the Dhamma. And so the Dhamma has to suffer through being taught in a language that is insufficient for the language. Even Lao Tzu knew this when he said, the Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao. In this case, the Tao and the Dhamma are exactly the same thing. And that's what we mean by the bigness of be here now is so vast that it cannot be described. And any time that you do describe it, you're taking an object in order to describe the object by perceiving the object, because it cannot be described directly. It has to be perceived. And now we're only describing the perception of it, not the actual object. And so
it's the best we can do, though, right?
Right. Well, no, the best that we can do is to see that we are constantly manufacturing reality. That the reality that actually exists cannot be spoken, cannot be fully comprehended. That at best, we're making mistakes on a regular basis. And that our mistakes are actually a method of operation that is instinctual. It's an automatic programming that we were born with and then reinforced strongly through our society and our families or whatever like that. And so we wind up as human beings living our lives as reptiles through our reptilian brain and not using the frontal cortex for its real value. We're always putting the frontal cortex to really strange, unnecessary things like mechanics, planetary mechanics, computer science. Believe me, the human race would be just as well off without computers, I know. As a computer scientist, I can tell you the world would be better off without computers. I would find something else to do. They have their advantages, but the one thing is for sure, and that is technology does not solve human misery.
That is very true.
So what does solve human misery?
I'm thinking that the answer is the Dhamma.
Well, yes, which in another way would be by living our lives as humans rather than as reptiles. Stop living on automatic pilot and start living in the here now. Stop living in the bowels of our own ship, sleeping in a rack, and get up on deck and take battle stations. So we have two parts of the brain. We have the automatic part, or the automatic pilot. So this is actually a good analogy for what you were talking about before. Imagine that you're an airplane pilot on a very expensive, uh, huge passenger airliner with all of the sophisticated electronics in it. And there's a thing called automatic pilot. And for most of the journey, the ship is on automatic pilot. But one thing is for sure, and that is that when the pilot turns off the automatic pilot, does he continue to live his life the way that he was when it was on automatic pilot, or does now he have to actually take control of that airplane? All right, so most people live on automatic pilot. They live on the programming that they were born with and has been reinforced through our society. And if we're going to turn that automatic pilot off, what that means is we're going to start living our lives as fully functioning human beings now. But in doing so, you're going to have to take control of your life. And you're saying, oh, that's a lot of work. I don't know if I want to do that or not. Why don't I just let the automatic pilot go? Because the automatic pilot, like he did last time, is going to run you right into a thundercloud.
Yeah.
Okay?
Actually, that clears it. That makes it more vivid to me in what way you meant the stuff you said about right effort, about coming out of wrong view into right view.
We've got too many visitors in the yard. Okay. Oh, wow, what a big gecko. You're right. Okay. Kitty was out in the yard, and I didn't want her to be injured by getting into that. But life goes on, even for dogs. This is Lucky. Hey, Lucky. Oh. Huh? Sorry about that.
No problem.
Today is day off. Sunday. Okay. So, um, that quality of taking the airplane off of automatic pilot and having to fly it yourself is basically that quality that I see in a lot of students who I couldn't be bothered. I'm just going to leave it on automatic pilot. But they think that doing a sitting meditation that lasts for, let us say, 40 minutes or an hour or whatever like that. They're reading all the stuff out of the book and they're getting all really good advice and everything. But when it's actually time to do the meditation, they think that it's okay to leave their meditation machine on automatic pilot and expecting that their result is going to be some destination that the airplane is flying to, rather than the experience of actually flying an airplane in this present moment, which is what is really to be done. And so um, that change of attitude is crucial to come off of the automatic pilot and to start coming back to the practice. And as you can tell, that is an actual ongoing issue. There will always be room for that right effort. But once you make up your mind that you're going to exert that right effort, okay, this is in fact a major part of the path, is the manufacture of the attitude of determination. Strong determination that you are in fact going to bring this life of crapola I am in to an end. I'm going to start enjoying my life instead, knowing that it's going to take right effort every time. Every time the mind is stuck in automatic pilot, we need to bring it out of automatic pilot and start flying the airplane again and enjoying it. And there's various things in the sutras that I'll discuss with you in sequence of the path that shows that this determination is actually something that grows. That at this stage it's this level, and then that determination gets stronger and stronger to the point that, in fact, at the point of Sotapan, we're dedicated to the Dhamma all the time. We don't even see anything else. It's just 100% Dhamma, but it's also 100% happy, joyful Dhamma. That, in fact, the joy of the Dhamma is part of the result of the determination for being in the Dhamma all the time. Because when you're in the Dhamma, you're free from suffering. Almost to the point that any time you're not in the Dhamma, that's suffering, and you know it, and you don't like it, and so you come right back out again. But this is a little bit later part of the practice, but it does have to do with that building up of determination and dedication to the path, to stay on the path all the time, knowing that any time we fall off the path, we're going to land in the ditch. That's what the whole idea of the path is.
Yeah.
But we spend so much of our lives in the ditch that we are, in fact, become experts on depths of ditches. And so when we get into the habit of being out of the ditch and on the path, we don't even want to go anywhere near it. We don't want to go into that ditch. Another way of talking about it is that actually the meditators, without understand, some of them don't understand this and they eventually figure it out, but we become more and more and more sensitive to suffering. And the more sensitive to suffering we are, we would think then that means the more suffering we experience. And that's correct. Well, why am I practicing something to get rid of dukkha, and by doing so I'm seeing dukkha more and more and more? The answer is because the dukkha that you're seeing is actually actual suffering less and less, because you're excellent at avoiding it. An example of that is someone shoots you, let us say that they throw a spear. You can see them 15 feet away. They grab the spear out of somebody's hand and they pick it up, they balance it, and they throw it at you. And if you can stand out of the way of that spear, then it's nothing. If it hits you in the middle of the chest, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
All right. Why is it a big deal? Because we weren't watching what was going on. So the question is, am I going to not pay attention to these spears that are being thrown only to be hit by them? Or am I going to start watching the fact that the whole atmosphere is full of spears?
Yeah. One thing that really, in the stuff you said before your dog was doing crazy stuff, that that I really liked and that I really resonated with was I could really get a sense of um, actually all the pleasant qualities of the present moment, the here and now, the how nice, like maybe I'm projecting too much, but I thought I could get a sense of what it must be like to be there all the time and how nice that must be. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do, except that again is not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is I can at least do it right now.
Yeah.
That's the way to look at it. And by that, at least I can do it right now. We know that that mentality, that attitude is going to follow us into the future so that in another time I can say, well, at least I can do it right now. But the Western mind is all about the future. You can't stand on your laurels. You got to continue to perform.
Yeah.
That's the mentality of the West. What have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
And so because of that, we get this cumbersome thing called time, which is in the West is such a burden and is delusional. Time is a delusion. There is only the present moment. And that we give ourselves a lot of suffering because we live in a delusional world that we call past and future, all based upon a clock, calendars, etc., like that.
Yeah.
And so the best way of doing it is to recognize, oh, well, I don't have to get caught into that. So that getting yelled at, that window, that room, out, 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 damn spot, as
Yeah.
Lady Macbeth said. I don't want that thought in here. Let's clean the mind out. Now, once you begin to see that you can do that, that no matter how obstructed the mind is, you can clean it out right now, that's the first noble step. That's the very first noble thing that we can do is to recognize that no matter how obstructed the mind is, that stuff can be cleaned out. That's the self-confidence, and that confidence is based upon um, the success of previously knowing that I could throw that stuff out of the mind. I've seen myself do that. Therefore, I know that it can be done again. And so that's the first noble step. The first step of Sotapan is to come to the champion's position that no matter how obstructed the mind is, it can be cleaned out and I can come to the here now. I can do that. That's the very first step of enlightenment. That's the first step of the noble path that is supermundane, noble, and not shared by ordinary people. Why is that? It's not shared by ordinary people because ordinary people have the idea that they can't change. And there's a whole lot of stuff that sets them up for not change. In fact, but not being able to change is the victim's position. Even during the time when a child is learning a new skill, while they're learning the new skill, they're treated by themselves and everyone else as a failure for not being able to do it yet, instead of congratulating the child on the success and the progress he's making. So we start off as losers, and we continue to be losers. We stay victims. And so the victim is the passenger on that aircraft, and wherever the plane goes, into whatever crowds or crashes or building that bumps into, the victim is not responsible because he didn't fly the plane. And so he can, in a way, say, well, at least I didn't cause any, I didn't do it. It's not my problem. All right. And so he can get by without that. However, once we decide that we're going to take control of that plane, now we're stuck with, it's my responsibility. I got to do it. And so you can see how, for instance, even Christianity wants to keep people in victim's position. In Romans, Paul says, good, who are you to be good? Only God is good. John says something like, except ye repent and take Jesus as your Savior, and so that's the whole basis of Christianity is the baptismal service, whether it's done young or old, it doesn't matter. What it basically means is that I cannot become a champion on my own. I must get help from some third party, some outside force, some autopilot that does a better job than the autopilot I've got now.
Yeah.
Another example of that is a leopard can't change his spots. Fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. These are examples of how people get into the position of an existential life position of being a loser, of being a victim. And then we get Dhamma and we think it's going to be easy when in fact we've got to get over this old bad habit of being victim. The old bad habit of letting the automatic pilot do all the work. Mindfulness takes effort. But it's not much.
Yeah.
It's just a little effort, but it is effort. Because go ahead.
Can I ask a kind of clarificatory question? Because the way we started all of this off was I was reporting on my endeavor to extend the meditation times of formal sitting practice.
I know.
And the way I'm interpreting all this is you kind of warning me of only paying attention to formal sitting practice, to not think that it's the only thing I need to do or the only thing I need to focus on.
Yes, that was in fact exactly how we got started, but boy, did we go all over the place.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering is, I see the point that I should not put exclusive attention on formal practice, but should I still try to sit longer, like to extend to
All right,
like?
I'm going to turn that back upon you. What advantage will you get by doing so?
Well, I've read in Shuladasa's book that the benefit of longer sits is that it allows the mind to settle more, so that you can kind of I don't know, have more productive sits because the mind gets into a more settled state.
All right, what is the mind going to produce when it's productive?
I don't know, maybe uh, eventually some insights down the road somewhere. I don't know.
Ah, okay. Insights do not come to those who have their eyes closed. Let me how to say that. Insights come by investigation. Investigation then is what we're looking for. All right. And so if insights are the intention and the investigation actually becomes an awakening factor or an enlightenment factor when it becomes unremitting.
Mm-hmm.
Unremitting mindfulness is the first factor. Now, what do we mean by unremitting? A lot of people think unremitting means steady or here all the time. Basically, what it means is it means over and over again. Unremitting means not just one bullet, but a barrage of bullets. It just keeps coming, okay, over and over and over again. So imagine that I've got a drum here with the hand is a drum, and this is the mallet or the drumstick. Is this the right way to play the drum? No, it's
No.
this. Okay, this is the unremitting quality of keep coming back. All right, so when investigation, which by the way, this investigation we mean that we're talking about has the quality of be here now so that you can investigate. It does have the quality of being on battle stations. It does have the quality that we're not going to just rope it off and say this is a police barrier and hope that it's going to tell us what it is. No, we have to do the kind of investigation that Sherlock Holmes would do. He's going to pick up every little hair and every little thing. He's going to take a magnifying glass and he's going to look everywhere. Okay, so this is the kind of investigation that needs to be done. And what are we investigating? Well, we're investigating the Four Noble Truths. Most specifically, we're investigating how the mind works. Okay, and we have to look at it like that so that the time that you're putting in needs to be productive rather than saying if you sit this long, this will happen. If you sit this much longer, that will happen. If you sit this much longer, that will happen. Doesn't happen. None of that works like that. But what we can say is that after a period of time of sitting, the mind will get tired.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that?
I have, but recently I've been noticing the opposite. So
All
that
right.
it up to at least up to a certain point, which is like 45 minutes to an hour, it gets better and better, and then it gets worse and worse.
Okay. All right. So let's use that now and let's go back to the gym as an example. If someone works out too much, then the next day they'll be tired and perhaps even sore muscles, etc., like that because they've worked out too much. There's also the possibility that if they're not working out or if they get a routine, they're going to hit a plateau and they're not going to go anywhere. All right. But one of the things that we do know that happens is that if someone is doing weightlifting and they do enough reps, they're going to get tired. And there's a sweet spot of tiredness, which means that now we've worked enough, we've busted down enough muscle so that it's going to grow back without making me sore all day tomorrow. But if I work further than that, then I'm going to be really sore. So there's a point when you're not working enough, then there's that sweet spot, and then there's too much. You need to find that sweet spot for yourself, and that sweet spot is when you know that the mind is getting tired. So you need to start watching for the mind getting tired of coming back and coming back and coming back. So sometimes it's not going to get so tired because you're good at doing something, and sometimes it's not getting tired because you're not doing it at all. And so you have to start looking at it from that perspective, that getting the mind tired after 30 to 45 minutes is good. We want to make the mind tired because that proves it has actually been working. Now, I wouldn't tell you this if this was the first week of your meditation practice. But now that you're at the point that you're at with it, you need to start watching for when does the mind get tired. In other words, it's not just tired that you're looking for, but begin to experience the various states that the mind can be in, that it's strong or it's weak, it's exalted, it's stable, or it's jumping all over the place, or in fact, you can go so far as to recognize which hindrance you're in as to what state that the mind is in. Normally, in fact, this is one that's the most funny of all, and I don't tell many students this, but meditators, Asian monks who have been monks for years and years and years, for them, the last hindrance that they still deal with on occasions is sleepiness, sloth, torpor, the mind getting tired. Why is that? Why does the mind get tired? It gets tired because it's been doing. All right, and so even for senior monks, the mind will get tired. That's exactly what we would expect it to do when it's doing its job. And so start watching for it. Start watching for what time it is. Start noticing that, oh, in fact, you can even start to take a little bit of a graph so you can see if, in fact, because some days you'll work really intense and then the mind will get tired soon. On other days, it looks like that you can go 45 minutes or so and the mind is not getting tired. Were you practicing well or not? It depends upon right effort. So your effort then will determine how quickly the mind will get tired. And so you can start watching for that kind of activities also. Everything has to do with the investigation. Investigate this mind. Start watching it. Investigate the body. Start watching it. And when you get good at this investigation, then we'll start watching feelings.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
So, in the weightlifting analogy, it would be the case that, at some point we have our optimum training volume, and then from that we get stronger, right? So over time we have to increase the weights. Would the analogy also be that when we meditate, the mind gets tired, and then over time we want to be able to sit longer and longer with higher intensity without the mind getting tired? So
I don't think that we need intensity. I don't think that we need intensity. In fact, the word intensity seems to not fit in with the quality of relaxation. And yet relaxation, how can you intensively relax? I mean, it's not making a lot of sense to use the word intensity. We're needing to define it with something else. We need to define the progress in some other way other than intensity. And there's many different ways actually to do it. One is to look at it in the sense of the building of pleasure, the building of satisfaction. Because normally when the mind gets tired, it's hard to be satisfied with the mind being tired. And so that's the way of looking at it, is what skills are we wanting to increase, knowing that intensity is not the right way to describe what we want to increase. But we want to increase those powers that we've been talking about, the powers of satisfaction, the power of safety, the power of success. And so as your meditation time wears on and the mind gets tired, you need to pay more attention to these things, because those are the things that you're wanting to increase, to be completely satisfied. I mean, look at it like this. If you had your life that you were living the way that you're living it now, and you could add only one or two ingredients, and those ingredients were something like satisfaction and success, or security, or perhaps those two things, satisfaction, success, and security, and you added nothing else to your life, what else would you need? This is why these things are called the power. Your real power, the thing that you're really looking for, is the freedom from suffering, and the freedom from suffering is because you feel safe. And feeling in danger, that's suffering. Feeling safe and secure, feeling satisfied, feeling successful, having those feelings manufacturing those feelings, I cannot think of what enlightenment would be without them, and I cannot think of an enlightenment that I would want without them. And that these things can all be wrapped up in one tight little word, and that one tight little word is happiness. And happiness is a skill to be developed. In that regard, success is a skill to be developed. Now, most people think, oh, well, if I do something really big, then I'll have a really big satisfaction, a really big success. The answer is no. If you have a really, really big challenge, more than likely, if it's a really big one, you're going to fail and 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 fail, and then you'll feel success, but you're already in a deep habit of feeling like failure. So, all right, a better way of doing it is to find little successes over and over and over and over again and start to build the feeling of success. Come back and start again. Never mind, start again. Never mind, feel good about this particular moment. Right now is the only time to practice. And by doing so, we develop the skill of success. So this is what we need to do in that practice time. And the place that you need to do it the most is when you've been sitting the longest, because that's when the mind has been gotten tired, if it's been practicing at all correctly. And so always in your meditation, in feeling like when you get off of that cushion, you can say, yeah, that was a wonderful sit.
Okay. So is there any value to any intrinsic value to sitting longer, or would you say it's all dependent on those factors, no matter how long we sit per day? Because it seems to me that just sitting like 10 minutes per day, even if it's if there's a lot of happiness, pleasure, and so forth, would just not be enough, because it's not enough practice time, you know. So
yes.
there seems to be
practice until you get tired. That's okay. Now, how long it's going to take you until you get tired will be depending upon your development. But that's a better way of looking at it, is do it until you get tired, and then do it some more for a little bit, and then stop on a high note.
All right, good. That makes sense to me. All right. I think
so when you're not on the cushion, we need to do it as many times as you can think about it. Now, for a monk, that would be enough instruction. Just go to your kuti and just think about your breath. And when you think about something else, come back and think about your breath, and that's enough. But in the world that we live in, sending you to the kuti is not going to work. And sending you to work is certainly not going to go to work. It's not going to work. So we need to find some other things, and I've got some other techniques, but right now we'll introduce it to you by, whenever you think about it, take a deep breath and come back and be here now and enjoy the moment. If you're writing an email and you think about Anapanasati or think about me or anything like that, take that moment to take a deep breath. Long, slow, happy, here now breath. At least take control of your airplane for a little moment. Do that dozens of times a day if you can. Good.
All right. I will.
Excellent. Well, let's wrap this up. We're coming up at about 2 hours now.
Yeah.
So we'll see you in a few days. Practice well, my friend. Enjoy being tired. Yeehaw! The mind is tired.
Thanks for your time.
Excellent. We'll see you. Bye-bye.